All right, good afternoon again. We're absolutely delighted, thank you. We're absolutely delighted to be joined by our friends from the Department of Economic and Social Affairs who are here to launch the World Social Report. In the center, we have John Wilmoth, the Director of the Population Division. On his left, if I get my left and rights correct, we have Daniela Abbas, the Director of the Division of Inclusive Social Development. And on the right, we have Shantanu Mukherjee, Director of Economic Analysis and Policy Division at UNDESA. So I will leave it to John to open up, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Stefan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The World Social Report is a flagship publication of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs that covers major topics in the area of social development. Over the years, it has served as a background document and provided policy analysis for intergovernmental discussions of social and economic matters. It has identified emerging social trends of global concern and analyzed relationships among major development issues of national and international significance. The 2023 edition of the World Social Report, Leaving No One Behind in an Aging World, has been prepared to commemorate the 20-year anniversary of the adoption of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. It shows that population aging and policies implemented in response to this global trend can be harnessed to uphold the pledge of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that no one will be left behind. The report is being launched in today's context of multiple and intersecting crises with major and sometimes devastating impacts on societies, economies, and the environment, all across the world. The report highlights how, by working together, we can address today's inequalities for the benefit of future generations, managing new challenges while also capitalizing on the opportunities that an aging society offers. At a time of declining trust in governments and in each other, policies that promote sustainability and equity in an aging world can foster solidarity across generations and communities. Building on the Secretary General's vision of our common agenda, such policies can form the basis for a renewed social contract suitable for the 21st century. For the first time, the World Social Report has been prepared jointly by 3 divisions of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs. I'm very happy that the directors of my 2 sister divisions have joined me this afternoon here on the podium. Each of the 3 directors will offer a brief overview of the chapter or chapters whose preparation was led by their respective teams. So I will begin with the demographic chapters. Let me start with the good news, which is that people all over the world are living longer, and there are now more people alive at older ages than ever before. Globally, a baby born in 2021 could expect to live 71 years on average, almost 25 years more than a newborn from 1950. While the gains in longevity have been broadly shared, there continue to be large differences across countries and regions and between social groups, including a 5-year advantage on average for women compared to men. Most of the increase in life expectancy has been due to reductions in childhood deaths, as documented in the report released by UNICEF and partners earlier this week. However, in recent decades, we have also seen substantial gains in longevity at older ages. In 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic, at age 65, the average person globally could expect to live an additional 18 years, compared to 11 years in 1950. As a result of these changes, celebrating one's 70th or even 80th birthday is becoming more and more common throughout the world. I thought I would know how to change the slide, but there we go. While people are living longer, they also tend to have healthier lives. For countries that collect such data, the available evidence suggests that the number of years lived in good health has increased overall for most people. However, for both men and women, the gains in total life expectancy have been somewhat faster than the gains in healthy life expectancy. This means that the additional years of life are mostly healthy ones, but also include some additional time spent in poor health or disability at older ages. Despite the gains in healthy life expectancy, substantial gaps between populations remain. For example, although women may live longer than men on average, they are likely to experience more years with poor health or disability at older ages compared to men. Given the health challenges faced by older persons, their living arrangements have a special importance, including for provision of their care. Data compiled by UNDESA reveal a general trend toward smaller families and smaller households globally. This trend has affected older persons who are increasingly likely to live alone or with their partner only. These changes in living arrangements have not reduced the burden on women, who are the primary caregivers for older persons worldwide. In most cases, it is female relatives, daughters and wives, together with growing numbers of informal care workers, often immigrants from less developed countries, who provide the care needed by older persons. Often, however, these caregivers lack formal training and qualifications, are poorly compensated, and do not enjoy appropriate legal protections. I will now turn the discussion over to my colleague, Mr. Shantanu Mukherjee, who will offer some comments on the economic impacts of population aging as described in the report.
Thank you, John. I'll just highlight a couple of the economic considerations that we've looked at in this report. Societies have come up with different mechanisms for ensuring that even though the capacity to be economically productive changes from birth to death, the consumption needs of every individual can be met at all ages. Of course, some of these mechanisms are less efficient than others, but in general, families, communities, governments, and the market enable transfers from those who are economically active to those who are not. Any changes in the proportion or in the productivity of the economically active part of society, therefore, has profound implications for everybody. This report examines both the consumption and production aspects of economies that are relevant in the context of aging. For instance, a potential drop in the proportion of the economically active part of the population can be offset by strengthening productive capacity through measures that enhance labor force participation, worker productivity, investments, and innovation. Across many countries, one common way to do this is by ensuring the full and equitable participation of women in the formal labor market. Let me observe that the global labor force participation rate of women still remains more than 20 points lower than for men in the age range 20 to 64 years. Ensuring a more equitable sharing of care demands that John spoke about as well, including those that are accentuated by aging, will be vital here. Presently, women provide about 3/4 of the demand for unpaid care, which is a net loss in our estimation of about 12 billion hours of work time per year from the paid economy. Increasing worker productivity is also essential, not just the total number of workers. In this period of rapid technological change, this needs action for inclusive human capital formation and development over the entire life cycle, in addition to investments that will stimulate innovation and secure access to technologies. Now, these measures are also critical for countries that are early in their demographic transition, where it may seem that aging is far away and not really a problem to take care of. This report emphasizes that countries have to be proactive to realize the potential demographic dividend of younger populations. Should they do so, then there can be lasting returns to the economy, another step in preparing for the inevitability of aging. Even though there is no one-size-fits-all, population aging is both certain and foreseeable. This means that policies can be set in place in advance, provided aging is considered as central to the process of economic development and planning. Thank you. John, back to you.
Now to Daniela.
Good afternoon, thank you. Could you click? Oh, it's there. Great. Before I go a teeny bit more in depth about the last 2 chapters of this amazing report, and this is the executive summary made available to many of you, I think, somewhere there on a desk. We're talking about a very important topic, but at the same time, we have to keep life also a little bit lighter and funnier. Please note the color of my hair. So coming back to the substance and the policies contained in this report and in the last two chapters, the division I have the honor to lead, the Division for Inclusive Social Development, for the department is the focal point on aging. And when under the guidance of the USG, when we were asked to work to create a core team composed by various divisions of the department, it was a very interesting exercise, I have to say, and we do hope that the content of the report will be properly publicized. Aging, as John and Shantanu said, from their perspectives, one demographic, the other one economic, and I'm going to tackle now the social one, is in demand of lots of attention, lots of attention. The world is aging fast, and we have only a couple of regions that are still very young. One is Africa. So if we are smart enough to produce policies that are going to facilitate these countries in the future in preparing the path for those youth of today who are going to be middle-aged and older people of tomorrow, we will make sure that at least those continents will not suffer. And I'm also thinking of India. In India, I think 65% of the population is younger than the age of 35, if I'm correct. So you might also wish to double-check this data, but it's important to really publicize this report for the others to come. I'm already in the old age, but I'm here to think also, we are here to think also of the well-being of others who are much younger. Now, there are 6 key messages I would like to bring to your attention. The rest you can find in the executive summary or ask us questions. The first one is equity and equal chances. Equal chances about what? For older people to grow in good health and with economic security. And these equal opportunities have to be offered from birth. Because without policies to prevent it, then disadvantages reinforce one another throughout people's lives and leading to large inequalities among older persons. And you can see that, represented there in this slide. You see, those who from the very early stages of their life get care and proper nutrition and so on and so forth, won't look like those on the other side who at the end up much poorer with disabilities and any other kind of disadvantages. So this report is trying to open the eyes of the world on the importance of giving equal opportunities from birth. And the second point, and therefore in the report, you will see that it shows that older persons are more likely to live in income poverty than people of working age. So we have to ensure the lifelong access to quality of education, health care, decent work opportunities for all can promote economic security at older ages and also reduce inequalities among older persons. And these policies can also ease pressure on public pensions and long-term care budgets. Second point, invest in decent work. The report shows that investments in decent work are paramount to reverse the decades of wage stagnation that have jeopardized people's ability to support themselves in older age. Informal employment and various forms of non-standard employment limit workers' social protection coverage and their contribution to public revenues. The third key message is about inequalities, a teeny bit more in depth in those 2 chapters. If countries do not act to reduce inequalities throughout people's lives, then older people in the future are increasingly likely to suffer from high economic inequality. And with aging populations in all regions, inequality and economic insecurity at older age can jeopardize progress towards the SDGs and undermine already shaky trust in governments. Fourth point, fiscal sustainability. Now, in general, concerns over fiscal sustainability have dominated policy discussions about population aging, especially in relation to older age pensions. And there have been policy reforms aimed to cut public pensions expenditures. However, pension benefits are still too low in many countries and beyond the reach of some groups. Mention was made to women or persons with disabilities, for instance. So the report, fifth point of the six, calls on governments to guarantee minimum pension benefits for all older persons universally, and to introduce flexible retirement ages into pension schemes. Why? Because workers who spend their lives in physical, demanding jobs should be able to retire earlier than many white-collar workers who may desire to keep working beyond the statutory retirement ages. Governments should balance the need for public pension systems to be fiscally sustainable with the goal of ensuring income security for all older persons in all countries. And it is important to remember that economic security is a human right, and it is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The last point, it is also important to eliminate barriers due to gender, age, disability, to the participation of older people in formal, decent work, and to support learning and skills development throughout the life course. Now, in closing, I want to thank the team, the UNDESA team, also the people in my division who have been working on this report. I think that the outcome is really successful. I'm very, very proud of having been part of this adventure. And if there are any questions, please feel free to. Thank you.
Majid?
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you so much. Majid Ghali, Rudao Media Network. I have two questions. The first one is on China. This year, China is expected to have a population decline for the first time in 6 decades. Would you characterize this as a start of a population collapse and second largest economy in the world? And what does it mean for the country in the next decade? And my second question is more about globally. Most experts generally agree that the decades-long prosperity and globalization that we've been experiencing is mainly due to a big factor in it has been the relatively young population worldwide. And with this report, you're talking about the aging of population. What does it mean for globalization? Don't you think it's virtually impossible to continue on with the same economic structure that we've had in the past few decades? Thank you.
You tempted me with these questions, but I think that actually when it comes to population, John is the best, and economy, Shantanu. Youth is in my heart, but I think that my two colleagues could well cover also that aspect.
Well, I'll just say first on the demographic picture for China, yes, things are changing rapidly. We know that, and it's we anticipate roughly an 8% decline in the size of the Chinese population between now and 2050. So that's quite significant. Exactly what it means for the economy, I'm going to defer to Shantanu on that. But it's always worth remembering that a growing population is a young population, and a population that's declining in size is an older population. So these two things go together. It's not just growth versus degrowth that we must consider. We have to think about what, in terms of the age structure of the population, what are the implications of that? And I think maybe that's the more important aspect rather than the decline in size is the shift to older ages. That may be the most significant part of the change.
Thanks. Great question. I think the starting point of responding to your question, which actually calls for quite a detailed response, is to note, as John has said, and as I was saying in my remarks, that what's important is what fraction of the population is economically productive and how productive they are, not just the fact that the age is changing. And if you look at some of the policy measures that countries are putting into place to kind of deal with both the aging process and the fact that they have a large youth segment, you'll see that this is kind of happening along two dimensions. One is to increase the size of the economically active workforce. I spoke about women because that's often overlooked, and that's kind of, in a sense, the lowest hanging fruit. Maybe a hard one to reach because otherwise it would have happened earlier. But there are other ways to increase the size of the economically active workforce. You'll have seen discussions about raising the retirement age. You'll have seen discussions about enabling greater migration and so on. So these are all structural factors that try to increase the size of the workforce. I think the second really important thing we have to keep in mind is what is the nature of the productive activity that the economically active part of the workforce is engaged in. And here I think there are two big shifts to keep in mind that are happening much faster than the aging population process. The first shift, of course, is technology, which is changing the kind of gains workers can get from working with technology and changing the nature of jobs. So that's why we are emphasizing that the need to have human capital or the ability to work with technology, to keep growing that over time, not to think that it's done when you leave high school or vocational training and so on. So this is an important part of the equation which kind of says how much workers will earn per hour worked, and therefore also how much they will be able to contribute towards their own aging and to the government revenues that are there. So this is one big shift. The second big shift that we see a little bit, not yet fully in place, but maybe hopeful signs, is changes in production and consumption patterns and in how energy is produced, which mean that there will be certain sectors of the economy, certain modes of production that will die off. And so it is important to be proactive here and see what are the growing sectors of the economy, where the investment will be most beneficial. So if, as you're saying, that we are in a period of lower growth, there is a way actually to boost this by investing in things that are growing and are likely to be more productive and not lead to stranded parts of the economy. So I think while the aging part of population is important, other trends that are in place are actually working out faster than population aging itself is. And I think from a planner's perspective, how to piggyback on those trends is probably a good way to prepare for the future.
Just one follow-up. From what my understanding from what you said is this is not a crisis. And my second follow-up is the first point you mentioned is basically countries are making sure that people are older, are still in the workforce, and also technology. But I didn't hear from you that this aging population, this trend will ever be stopped. The world is aging, and that is unstoppable.
Yes.
Yeah. No, we are saying all along it's inevitable. It is unstoppable for reasons from the evidence we see, correct, John? In a
Well,
sense?
I mean,
Yeah.
it's driven by the demographic transition towards
Yeah.
longer lives and smaller families, which appears to be something that's happening universally across the world. And nobody wants to go back on that. Nobody wants to go back on, have lower levels of life expectancy and women having 6 or 7 children to, compensate for the early death. So, I mean, nobody wants to go back. So assuming that we don't go backwards, then yes, we will have older populations, much older than we've had in the past.
Thank you, Chantal. Fatih? And then we'll go to...
Thank you, Steph. For the panel, thank you very much for your time and for the briefing. My question is for Director Baz with regard to item 5 that you have mentioned, economic security and the universality of pension in countries. We see in different parts of the world, there is the developed world, the Western world, where we see the pensions and what is described as entitlements is under attack. We move to other countries where it have bad fiscal policies, like Greece. We have seen a decade ago there was an overextending of the social benefits and the pension benefits, and that have led to the almost collapse of the country. We have seen bad monetary policies which devaluate the value of the currency, that even if they receive pensions, it become useless. And we see countries that don't have a pension system to start with. How can there be a deliverable system to ensure that these standards go across the globe? Do we need a treaty, a multilateral treaty to impose that economic security and the universal right of pension in addition to the Human Rights Declaration? Or what else can be done? Thank you.
Are we live?
Yes, we are.
You know, in 1995, we had the first World Social Summit in Copenhagen. And if we refresh our memory, it was discussing, and in the declaration, there are references to the various social groups and how important it is also to keep promoting the social protection floors and develop them. And then, of course, each country has its own sovereignty to decide how to do that at its best. COVID-19, this pandemic, and many other crises that the world will face have taught us that actually making sure that people have decent jobs, they have pensions, there are some protection, the social protection floors are in place, and the social contract takes care of all the various populations, even those in need or more vulnerable. Well, I do think that we do have an opportunity, if member states so decide, suggested by our Secretary General in our common agenda. For instance, to have a World Social Summit maybe in 2025, if member states so decide. And that could be probably the right place to revisit the Copenhagen Summit on social development and see what has the developments that have taken place during the last 3 decades or so. And because of the crisis we have faced, how relevant technology and many other areas my colleagues mentioned are, and they needed to be tackled in something that I don't want to give it a name, I don't want to call it social contract, but definitely something that has to deal with the social protection for all. That could be an opportunity if member states so decide.
Thank you. Mary Vaughan?
Thank you very much, Yvonne Murray, RTE News, Ireland's national broadcaster. So I have a question about women in the workforce, please. I think the statistic was women still bear 3/4 of the demand for unpaid care work. Is that correct? I want to ask, what do you think are the most practical and effective policies to deal with that disproportionate burden that women bear? Because we know that even in countries where there is decent maternity leave, free childcare, support for women in the workplace, that they still drop out at a certain time in their lives because they have other caring responsibilities. So what are the practical steps? Are there new policies that could be introduced?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of the fact that this question is, that the answer here is not just about economics. It has to do with social norms, with cultural dimensions, and with alternatives to this care burden of work. So you've already said that there are policies such as parental leave and so on. And I think the important part is to see whether these policies are also reinforcing women's traditional roles or actually promoting this shift to have a more equitable distribution between men and women. And so, for example, I remember talking to my colleagues in Germany, where I believe there's a very long period of maternity benefit. But the net result of that is that women lose touch with the profession. And even when they come back to the guaranteed job, they cannot progress as fast. So obviously, governments can encourage a more equitable distribution of the care burden by promoting parental leave rather than just maternal or paternal. That, however, applies only to people who are in the formal workforce, right? And we already have a huge amount of women who are doing paid work, but it's in the informal workforce. So another set of policies would be enabling their transition to more formal work, through enterprises that actually can attract them and which are paying revenues and paying taxes. And this is a big part of economic empowerment. I think a third set of policies, which is to equip women to actually proactively take advantage of opportunities that may be created by simple things like, for example, reducing their burden of care work in terms of collecting water and firewood, which takes up a big part of responsibilities in developing countries. So when, let us say, piped water system is extended as part of attaining the SDGs, or there is, renewable cooking solutions provided, which are part of the energy agenda, these should be coupled to encourage women to enter enterprises which they're doing already, but having now more time for, because time is saved. So I think one has to be a little bit creative here, but I think the crux of the matter is that you have to look essentially at the barriers that are keeping women from entering the workforce and in the particular cultural and country context and work to address them. Thank you.
Thank you. Evelyn, then we'll go to Stefano, and we'll need to wrap it up.
You may have mentioned this, but doesn't the aging population call for more immigration? And sorry, I'm just turning off the phone. And well, I find your report very depressing, because I should have been dead by now.
I'm not sure I'll comment on the second one, but
Well, in the long run, we're all.
in the long run, we're all dead. But this is, I think, you think about what's the alternative to population aging? It's early death. So, population aging is a great success. It really reflects an enormous success of human beings to have extended the lifespan to such a degree that we now have these much older populations. But do aging populations call for more immigration? Societies will find ways to, have the balance in population that's needed for their particular circumstances and needs. And if they need more workers, then there will be a demand for migrants to possibly fulfill the needs that exist in the labor market. So migration is one response to population aging. If there are labor shortages related to population aging, that is one possible response. As Shantanu has mentioned, there are other responses like bringing more women into the labor force, allowing older people to continue working as well. So immigration is one of the possible responses to a worker shortage that may, come to be in the process of population aging. But we're very cautious about talking about migration as sort of a replacement of populations and so forth, because that's politically very fraught. But it does function in that way. But at some point, it can't serve that purpose for the entire world, because as the rest of the world starts to age, of course, there will be some countries, there will always be some, not always, but there will be a progression of countries as far as they go through this process of economic and demographic development. Then there will be a demand for migrants for certain groups of countries, and there will be others that are still growing that can supply that demand. But eventually, there may be no more countries that are growing rapidly enough to kind of supply the migrants that are needed to fulfill the need in an aging society. So it works well now for OECD countries because there are so many other countries that have been growing in recent decades and can provide a constant stream of migrants. But whether that will always be true in a systematic way is less clear.
Stefano, and then we'll
Yes, Stefano Cravoci, New York, you already kind of answered because it was the same topic, migration. So the only thing I have to add here is, I don't know if it's a question, is when a country, I mean, we know always that famous percentage of that if you don't add to your population, if you go a certain, you disappear as a country, right? Unless you become another country. But the point is, you've been saying it's a good news, but are we at the point that certain countries, I'm thinking certain European countries, are in few years going to disappear if this trend continues? I say disappear, I mean as a culture, as a population. Of course, there will be somebody living there, but there will not be any more.
I don't know. I mean, this is a very broad question, and what the future will bring in this regard, and whether I mean, certainly, there was a book that came out a few years ago about population collapse, about how the world's population is collapsing. No, it isn't. We're still growing. I mean, this is the world is still growing. We're still gaining people for the foreseeable future. It's still a world of growth. Some parts of the world, yes, are decreasing in size. Some countries are losing population overall, but they're not. It's not to the point where they're disappearing. I mean, it's a reduction of 10% or something over several decades. I mean, that's significant, but that's not that the population is disappearing or that the culture is being wiped off the map. I mean, these things are terribly exaggerated in my view. And of course, we also know that immigrants can embrace the culture of the place that they move to, and they can become part of that and part of the fabric. That's certainly true in this country, that there would be much less culture, fewer Hollywood movies, and so without the immigrants that have played such an important role in that. They've created the culture of this country in many ways. So if other countries follow that sort of model, I don't think there's any risk that they disappear, that their culture disappears just because of a contribution of migrants to the demographic renewal of the population.
On that note, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for taking all the questions, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.